The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Minnesota.
I received the puck, I looked up, and I got hit.
I was going up for the rebound, and another one of my teammates was coming down from jumping and elbowed me in the head.
A concussion is a metabolic event in the brain, and it changes your cognitive processing.
I have one concussion on file. Do I believe I probably had more? Yeah.
I couldn't see straight, and I fell over. She kicked the ball, and I immediately knew to turn around. If it hit me in the face, it probably would have broken my nose. But I turned around, and it hit me like right on the pony.
This is a much more serious issue than we thought it was just a few years ago. We've witnessed a rapid increase in the participation of girls and women in exercise and sport. There's very little real solid information on the impact of concussions in female athletes. The University of Minnesota is one of the largest, most comprehensive research and educational institutions in the entire world. We have the full range of academic disciplines that are concerned about this particular issue. The Tucker Center is in the School of Kinesiology. It's very concerned about the full range of research related to girls and women in sport. This is a big issue to the people who are in the neurosciences at the University of Minnesota. It's a big issue to those people who are in the rehabilitation sciences and need to treat people who had concussions. And so there's no better place to have a serious conversation about the implications of this growing issue, this growing problem, and I would say this growing threat to the long-term health of girls and women who participate actively in exercise and sport.
Even though Title IX wasn't specifically about sports originally, it was just about a broader, you can't discriminate on the basis of gender, it has had its greatest impact in the world of sports. Before Title IX, there were about 1 in 27 girls played sports at the high school level. Today it's 1 in 3. For the first time in our history, we have a critical mass of young girls and women who play sports at all levels, from recreational to elite. Nationwide, about 40% of all people who participate in sports and physical activity, including the number of young women involved in scholarships at the intercollegiate level, are female.
Even though female athletes sustain fewer concussions in terms of frequency, the rate of concussion, which is a way of looking at injury per unit of activity time, the rates of concussion for female athletes, both in high school and college, are higher, 2 times or more higher than males in comparable sports. So when we look at basketball athletes, it's the female injury rate for concussions is significantly higher than males. Same with soccer, same with ice hockey, and so that's raised a lot of red flags in terms of researchers and practitioners trying to understand what it is about females that makes them more susceptible to concussion injury in those sports in particular.
Females seem to be having more concussions than males, and we're not sure why.
One of the theories is that women and girls are more apt to report their symptoms, and in some of the male sports there's a sort of a culture against talking about some of that.
Historically, I think people have thought that males are less likely to report than females, and I think the evidence bears that out. Unfortunately, I feel like the trend is going the other way, with girls now having to prove themselves in the male territory of sport historically, that have perhaps swayed too much the other way to trying to be tough in the same way that the guys are.
They see the NHL players and, you know, wear their jerseys and have posters in their bedroom and that kind of thing, so they look up to these guys. And when you have the fighting penalties and the instigator penalties and all of that kind of thing, I think sometimes kids think that that's the way hockey is, and it's rough and tough, and you can fight out disagreements on the ice, and it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal.
There are many circumstances in which I think we can all understand why an athlete might do anything possible to stay in the game. There's such a limited window of opportunity for athletes, too, that they feel like every game matters, and so it's very important. So I think sometimes, based on the situation, athletes will stay in. Something like 50% of athletes that had concussions weren't aware that the symptoms that they were having were symptoms of a concussion. So there's sort of a lack of knowledge or awareness. And I think there's a lot of peer pressure to play. Again, what we call in psychology impression management, managing how others see us, is very, very important in athletics. And in this case, it works to the disadvantage of the health of the athlete.
Obviously, football, the number of hits a player takes is uncomparable to probably any other sport, maybe with the exception of hockey. And in women's hockey, where it's non-checking, even though there's a lot of contact, I think the argument is that you receive far fewer impacts. But I would say that what we know from the research is that it doesn't have to be a heavy impact to cause brain injury or a concussion. So even something that might look inconsequential in terms of impact may indeed lead to a concussion. And I think that's why a lot of times it goes unreported.
What we don't understand is if what we consider subconcussive blows have any type of a long-term effect. That is really what we don't know now. So, everything's measured in newtons. We, have based some research, and we think that 96 newtons is about the average that the brain needs to receive in force for a concussion. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the force that hits the helmet. What does a 20 newton force do if you get 200 of those in a day? We don't know. We don't know if there's enough trauma there to cause any imbalance in the brain.
It could be that when they are hit or in a collision, that neck is spinning, and we know it stretches the axons on the neurons in the brain, and there may be more stretching for those young females. There's an NIH study that shows a little less myelin on the axons in the females, and I wonder, when you take the myelin off the axon, or it isn't there, then does that axon tangle more when there is a rotational spin or sudden linear acceleration or deceleration? A hockey player or a football player who's getting repeated trauma, and when we measure that with the HITS telemetry, the accelerometers, a large hit of maybe 171 G-force may not cause any symptoms at all, and then maybe another 150 G-force, no symptoms. 30 G-force, and all of a sudden the player's had it, he's out. The symptoms have all manifested.
When we see concussions on the sideline or head injuries, one of the biggest things we're concerned about immediately is that there's something more going on, like a bleed in the brain, for example. And that's one of the things we're trying to assess for immediately on the sideline and trying to rule out or monitor for.
So our brain's fluid. You got to think of it as like jello in your skull. And so when you get hit, you can have that directly, or you can have that as the brain kind of sloshes across and hits the other side of the brain. We're more prone to having a concussion and prolonged symptoms with a rotational force versus a true linear acceleration.
And you don't have to have a frank loss of consciousness either. And it causes an alteration in the brain and in different skills that are associated with your brain, like thinking, emotions, balance, hearing, sensitivity to light, sound.
A player who is used to doing everything exactly right, performing perfectly, will forget the pass pattern in football or in hockey, might turn around and head toward the wrong goal.
They feel unsteady, sometimes they're irritable, have mood changes. We see a variety of things going on with sleeping patterns. Sometimes they are very fatigued and sometimes they just don't sleep well. Sometimes just a feeling of not being quite right. Or I had an athlete say to me the other day, she felt like her brain was empty, which is just a little concerning.
We've looked at the impact of severe injury on young athletes, and the depression is really very marked. They're pulled out of their peer group, they're pulled out of they have exercise deprivation. If you take a sport like hockey, the size, the speed, the equipment, the aggressiveness has increased hugely. And then you add to that the fact that a lot of women don't have developed neck muscles, and there are some studies now that are showing the role that the neck muscles play, particularly in the anticipation piece. If your neck is really relaxed and you're not anticipating, and now somebody comes and hits, your head is going to spin in a rotational manner or forward to back.
Research has shown us that once you've had one concussion, you're at 4 to 6 times greater risk of having a second concussion. We want to make sure that the concussions do not occur close together, because there is something called second impact syndrome, which occurs primarily in adolescence. We see it more in males than we do in females, which may be related to hormone effects. But what happens is there is this malignant brain swelling. The brain swells, and there are very, very serious side effects. Children die with this, and the ones that do not die are left with symptoms that are very significant, either cognitively, physically, and or emotionally for the rest of their lives, potentially.
We have gone in one generation from young girls hoping that there is a team to young girls hoping that they make the team. That's the difference because of Title IX.
I started playing hockey when I was 5 years old. Hockey was kind of in my family. My dad coached, my brother played, and I just kind of initially was a little rink rat running around the rinks and kind of bugged my parents, when do I get to play, when do I get to play? And at 5 years old, they finally let me lace them up, and the only problem with that was there were no other girls playing at the time, so obviously my mom was a little bit cautious and worried that her youngest daughter would be playing with boys. But for me, it was just, I had a passion, I had a love for the game. It's what I woke up wanting to do, and when I went to bed at night, it was the last thing on my mind.
My dad, actually, I grew up around the hockey rink. He was playing still at that time, and so I'd follow him there and just kind of hang around while he was on the ice. And I was just always around it. I started playing forward. My mom actually tried to put me in figure skates, and I really wasn't having much of that after a few years, and I just really wanted to play hockey. And there was a tournament where our goalie couldn't attend, and so we only had one goalie, and if we didn't have a goalie, we couldn't go to the tournament. And so I volunteered, and after that I just wanted to continue playing because I had so much fun back there.
I started as a figure skater, and then I eventually picked up hockey due to my older brother. I started playing competitive hockey when I was a squirt. I played squirt travel, and then Pee-wees I played travel hockey, and Phantoms and midgets. I played all the way up until midgets boys hockey. I love playing boys hockey and being rough and checking. I love that, and I also love how girls hockey wasn't checking. It was a more finesse game, and I really, really enjoyed that. But I got to play both, so I was okay.
I think a reason why I'm sitting here today as a 3-time Olympian is because I grew up playing with the boys. I'm 4 girls growing up to play co-ed. I think you learn from them, and they also learn from you. I think we're a heck of a lot better listeners and understand things. Did I have to compete harder because I was playing against the boys and the only girl out there? For sure. Yeah, for sure.
Since 4th grade, I started playing at a rec team in 4th grade, and then played for school and traveling teams, and now in high school. It was during practice. I couldn't keep my eyes open. I was dizzy, and my eyes started flickering. They said that my eyes were like twitching and moving back and forth, and I couldn't really control it, couldn't keep them open, and couldn't look in the light.
I got a call from my husband that he was on the way to the emergency room with Natalie. That was our first trip to the ER, and they said she needed to go 5 days without headaches, and then she could go back to, or she could start working out again. And we got her to about the end of January, and she went about 5 days without headaches, and then went back to practice and ran, and within about 15 minutes, she was symptomatic entirely again of all the things she had with the original concussion, and we had her back in the ER again. We knew right away what it was. The eyes it's very frightening to look at your child and know that they can't focus on you.
I began playing officially probably in 6th grade.
I started in BAA, which is Bloomington Athletic Association, probably in 3rd or 4th grade. And then I started playing traveling at U12, which is under 12 for Bloomington. We had a goalkeeper last fall at Prior Lake High School who got a concussion. He was out for about 2 to 3 weeks. My goalkeeper that I currently have, she's been out for 2.5 months. So apparently the time is very variable.
My first concussion was probably 4 years ago, playing in an adult league. I woke up underneath the ambulance. I didn't have a whole lot of the normal common type of experiences. I didn't have a headache. I could feel a strange sensation in my head when I went up and down stairs afterwards. I felt very almost euphoric for quite a while afterwards, just kind of different. But for the most part, I felt really good. I felt good enough to be playing again. But I have a brother-in-law who's a physician who insisted that I stay out. So that was probably really good that he's as firm as he is.
At the time, I was only 18 years old, and we were playing a game against Team Canada. I was on the U.S. team and just kind of caught a pass up the middle, and a girl lined me up and got the best of me. And at the time, I was very disoriented. I couldn't tell you how I felt at the exact moment because I don't remember. I just remember kind of scrambling back to my feet, and luckily the bench was only a couple feet away, and got back on the bench and just kind of felt out of it, kind of felt dazed. The trainer and the coach came by and said, "You all right?" And I said, "Yep." And the next shift when I went out, obviously I knew something was a little off. They probably saw something was a little off, me scrambling around on the ice. And so I came back, and the coach asked again, the trainer, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I don't feel right." And they said, "Yep, go hit the showers, you're done for the night."
When you break your wrist or you break your ankle, it's an injury. But when you have a concussion, you think that it's not really an injury, when you're going through it, because you think you should be able to go right back to playing because you're not really limited by much of anything physically. Some girl ran me and took me down, and then my helmet slipped up, and so my head hit the back of the ice, and I didn't really have any protection on that one. I didn't remember who people were, and I didn't remember things. I think I got depressed a little bit, anybody who is competitive really wants to always be in the game, and so when you're sitting out and watching and missing out on being a part of that, myself and I think my parents and everybody wondered whether this was really worth it. But I did clear up and I did come back to normal and I was fine, and I don't really know. I mean, I'm still learning a lot about it myself as a coach, kind of being very sensitive to when my players get hit or something happens to them, because there is a lot going on, and studying and how does it affect you later on in life. And so I think some of that stuff that I start to think about now, but you don't think about that as a player because all you want to do is play. As you get older, you start to learn that the rest of your life is more important than the actual game itself.
We're really big in focusing on building community and building team, telling the girls to always have each other's back. I can tell you of an instance where a goalie went down and was hit very hard. We were on the sideline and didn't see it, but one of the defenders picked up on her confusion and the fact that she just wasn't with it anymore. And so they sent word that she had to get off the field immediately.
You just got to know yourself and be disciplined enough to allow yourself to sit out. And even if you feel like you're ready to go and you just want to get out there and play, if your mind can't keep up, you're better off just recovering, resting, doing the things you need to do so you can come back 100%. I'm actually helping the team out more by making sure I'm fully recovered to return to play.
Baseline testing provides a neuropsychological baseline of athlete performance in terms of things like reaction time and other cognitive processing tasks. And then if an athlete is concussed, they compare their scores on these same neurocognitive tests to their scores at baseline and note the difference, and then really don't allow the athletes to return to play until their neurocognitive capabilities have returned to that baseline level. So it really establishes a pre-injury sense for what that athlete's cognitive abilities are and provides a standard against which to judge their recovery.
The responsibility for return to play is a little controversial, but I think it should not be the athlete, because the athlete is always going to want to play, to please the coach, to do it for the team because they like to compete. So the athlete is out. The coach, I think if they're educated and in tune with the signs and symptoms, maybe, but the coach might also have other conditions about winning and competing and wanting to outperform others, that they might make poor decisions in the heat of the moment. And I think parents most often have their child's best interest at heart, but might also fall into that, well, if I take my child out, they won't be noticed, and he or she will be perceived as not a team player, and they might not get exposure for the college scholarship that all parents think their children will get. And so parents might not be the best either. So I really do think it has to be a medical professional that's trained in concussions and knowing when return to play is appropriate.
So for a person who's sort of followed a standard concussion resolution, for example, most people with a concussion will get better in 7 to 10 days. Have not had a long history of concussion, for example, in the past, or concussions that took a long time to get better, or one that was very close to the current concussion, then we'll try to start them back with some light exertion usually put them on something like an exercise bike, and not so much to get a workout, but just to get their heart rate up a little bit and get moving and see how they feel. And then we generally do a graduated progression from there, trying to make it a little more intense, adding some impact. Then we add a little more stimulation, a little more agility, side-to-side movements. For example, if you're a hockey player, some time on the ice, maybe with a few other players doing some drills, but not maybe the full team, for example. And then eventually the last stage is putting people back into a full contact situation. So we really try to protect them from being in conditions where they can get hit again or re-injured. And anytime that they have symptoms develop, then we usually have them step back and repeat the level beforehand and make sure that they're okay before we advance them.
Many athletes and parents and coaches in particular, I would say, falsely assume that equipment will protect athletes from concussions when in fact that's not what helmets are designed for.
It protects against focal injury from a puck or a stick or a skate blade if it were to catch the helmet, but it can't stop the rotational acceleration or the linear acceleration.
Technique is probably the biggest thing that can be done to prevent concussion. When it comes to sports like hockey, keeping your heads up. Sports like basketball, being aware, basketball and soccer, being aware of your surroundings and trying to protect yourself from the elbow and teaching good fundamentals in those sports from the coach's aspect can help really reduce the number of these injuries.
I've done a little bit of work on how coach and parent behaviors on the sidelines influence athlete behavior on the field. One of the interesting studies that I have worked on is that when athletes perceive that coaches and parents want them to win and they want them to do anything to win, it's win at all costs, that athletes will be more likely to demonstrate poor sport behavior, which includes the intent to injure others.
I don't know if people really realize what damage they can do to other people while they're playing, if they're playing out of control or outside the laws of the game.
Learning good sportsmanship at a young age, I think, is something that that player holds on to.
We're really just at the start of looking at sex and gender differences. Sometimes, unfortunately, changes don't occur until there is something scary or catastrophic. And so though many of us really want to use things like education, prevention to really help change behavior, unfortunately it's catastrophes that garner people's attention. Once somebody starts having concussions, I think if they are children, I think that parents really need to not be a friend, but have the information that they need to be able to guide the level of participation and perhaps change the level of participation or the sport if somebody has sustained too many injuries.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Minnesota in association with the Big Ten Network.